Welcome to Season 4, Episode 3 of The Man Who Woke Up the Buddha. This one's entitled, Follow the Money. Previously, as Sid lay on the ice doing snow angels, he continued reminiscing about the early days of his roller coaster ride in the world of finance, as the Buddha struggled to keep up with Sid's stories and their spiritual implications, if any. Sid didn't think he was dead, although he couldn't be too sure. After all, he'd been doing snow angels on the ice and watching his life pass before his eyes, which, rumor had it, is what happens when you die. But, Sid reassured himself, it wasn't like his whole life was passing before his eyes, just his business life, and really, just the first few years of that. So it seemed his prognosis wasn't all that bad. He had to admit, though, that his angeling had slowed to a devilish crawl, and the idea of lifting one of his wings was daunting. He considered pinching himself, but his gloves were way too thick, and besides, he'd been out on the ice so long that he was really stiff. That could be a sign of rigor mortis, he thought. Still, he was ready to continue his review of his lifelong financial ups and downs, only to be distracted from the timeless rush of memories by all the commotion in the here and now, in which Beatrice was still barking and licking his face, and his daughter Abby was still yelling to her son Willie to get a rope. Also in the background, he now heard sirens rising into a glorious rendition of Chopin's funeral march. He liked how the sirens wailed up and down, as if they were the left and right hands of the piano in unison announcing, "He's dead!" Maybe he had made too hasty a conclusion about his mortality. But the next thing he knew, he felt himself being dragged away from the ice, as if sledding uphill, which he was pleased to realize was at least in the general direction of heaven. Then the sirens stopped, the funeral march ended, and he drifted off. When Sid opened his eyes, he was surprised to find himself in his own bed, instead of heaven or hell, or even the hospital. He slowly turned his head to take in the multitude who had assembled to witness his resurrection. Abby and Di were sitting on the couch Junior and his friends had brought upstairs so they could watch football games with Sid. Willie had dragged in a beanbag chair from one of the other bedrooms and put it as inconspicuously as he could in a corner, the way kids do when they know that, as soon as the grown-ups realize they're there, they'll have to leave. The guest of honor was Dr. J, one of Sid's best friends, not to mention his oncologist, who had turned around the straight-back desk chair and was sitting in it, reading a magazine and drinking a single malt, one ice cube. "I guess it's 5 o'clock, Sid said, looking for a neutral subject. 5:02, Dr. J said. "How long have I been out?" "On and off since late morning," Abby answered. "How did you all know I'd wake up now?" "It's 5 o'clock, Di said, adding, "Obviously." "Can I have a drink?" Sid asked, not all that hopefully. "No," they all said in unison. "Okay, so what's the diagnosis?" "My professional opinion?" Dr. J asked. Sid squeezed his eyes shut and put his fingers in his ears. "You're a fucking idiot." "And you're not so professional?" Sid said, opening his eyes. "Same." "I want a second opinion," Sid insisted. "You're a fucking idiot," Di said, glaring over her wine glass at Sid. Guess that settles it. How did I get here, anyway?" Same way we all do, the Buddha thought. Sign up, find a willing sperm and egg, and... "I mean in bed here," Sid clarified to no one. "Not like on the planet." Abby shook her head. "Fortunately for you, Willie pretended to be sick this morning, so we wouldn't have to go to school. So we came over here to keep you company." "Good boy, Willie. Did you do the fake projectile vomit I taught you, or the sore throat?" Sore throat," Willie said quietly. "And," he added, glancing at his mom, "I drank some tomato juice before Mom looked down my throat, so she'd think it was red, just like you told us." "Excellent. Cranberry is less obvious, but tomato's fine." Come on, Willie, Abby said. Let's go home so I can wash your mouth out with soap. As Dr. J also stood up to leave, he reached in his back pocket, pulled out his prescription pad, scribbled something on it, and started to hand it to Sid, but Di reached over, took it out of his hand, looked at it and nodded, and then handed it to Sid. It was a picture of an ice skate in a circle with a line through it. As soon as everyone left, Sid slid back down in his bed and began watching the second part of the documentary, Sid and Money, go figure, about his blessedly short career in commodities trading. The Buddha had watched the first part of Sid's economic biopic, or rather biopsy, closely for clues as to what the two of them might be able to do in the brief time Sid had on Earth to help people lighten the fuck up, as they were both now fond of putting it. He had to admit he'd been impressed when he watched Sid recklessly lose money without resorting to the typical wailing, moaning, and gnashing of teeth that humans usually displayed upon learning that they had lost something that didn't exist and that they never really had in the first place. People could definitely spare themselves a lot of unnecessary suffering, he thought, if they knew how to laugh in the face of financial ruin. But the Buddha wondered, how will Sid deal with success, which he knew could whip humans into even greater whirlwinds of delusion? Sid began trying to make angel wings again, but his arms got all tangled up in the sheets, so he rolled over on his side and propped his head on his hand. The Buddha sighed. Where did they get the idea I used to sleep in that position? You do it one time, and the next thing you know, people are casting life-size bronze statues of you doing it. It made his etheric wrist cramp just thinking about it. For deep contemplation or serious daydreaming, I prefer lying on my back with my hands folded over my heart. The Buddha proceeded to do just that, and so did Sid. Sid had already lost $5,000 trading oil futures, which you can read about in the previous episode, in a desperate attempt to avoid having to get a real job again. One morning, after a few more weeks of wrestling with his charts and making bad, although thankfully just imaginary trades, he was assaulted by a faded green mechanical bank from the 50s, the kind where you load a penny, pull back the spring, and shoot. The bank was designed so the coins would go right into the mouth of a globe of the Earth mounted on a pedestal. He had managed to keep it through dozens of moves, but the frequent packings and unpackings had thrown off its precision 1950s calibration, so the floor around his desk was covered with pennies that had missed the target. You want money? It was a demand, not a question. Sid stared at the bank. Clearly, that's where the voice had come from. How much you want? Just change the numbers on paper. Humans think about money all day. Kindness all day? No. Compassion all day? No. Love all day? No. Ha! Money all day. I will bury you in money. Sid began to laugh at the idea that some wandering spirit had decided to deposit itself in a 1950s mechanical bank. You laugh? Good. Still hope. Sid picked up the bank and began shaking it, hoping it was now miraculously full of gold coins. But there was only a quarter. Now the voice came back clear, distinct, firm but kind, normal volume. If you play, I play. If you work, I vanish. Sid nodded. He had no doubt it was true. Figuring he had nothing left to lose, he decided to have some real fun. Based on what he'd learned reading a few obscure financial publications, listening to a talking mechanical bank, and consulted with an old woman downtown who used a faux crystal ball to predict the future, he was still convinced the price of heating oil was going to skyrocket. He just had to wait for a sign. In November, workers in the Iranian oil fields went on strike, and production plummeted, just as the winter heating season was starting. He took his last $5,000 and went all in. Within weeks, it was worth just $500. He was baffled, but unbowed. A month later, he went up to the bedroom, opened up the bottom drawer of Di's dresser, and took out a small box on which she'd written, "Sid, if you take this, I'll kill you." Inside the box was a diamond ring that Di's grandfather had bought her grandmother for their 25th anniversary in September 1929 to celebrate the fact he was making a killing in the stock market. Then Sid went to his bureau and took a box out from the bottom drawer. Inside was a gold watch that was engraved as a present from his grandfather, who he'd never met, to his father, whom he barely knew. Then, whistling breezily, he told Di he was going for a walk, which he did, to the pawn shop. At 8:40, he left the pawn shop with $3,500 in cash and walked to the bank, still whistling. At 9:05, he left the bank with a cashier's check and walked to the brokerage office, still whistling. For the next 15 minutes, his broker tried to convince him to stop trading before he lost any more money. Sid kept whistling. When the markets opened at 9:30, he went all in. He now had the right to buy 84,000 gallons of heating oil at a strike price of 44 cents a gallon. Good price. Too bad he couldn't sell it door to door. He kept whistling and vowed not to think about money again all day, just like the mechanical bank had suggested. Instead, he took 2-year-old Abby ice skating, played squash for an hour, took a long nap, cooked his famous meatloaf and mashed potatoes with gravy for dinner, and found a babysitter at the last minute on a school night so they could go see Apocalypse Now. Through it all, he kept his promise. When he glimpsed the thought of money starting to sneak in the back door of his consciousness, he refused to think it. At the theater, he handed the ticket taker a bill without looking and didn't count the change. When he paid the babysitter, he just reached in his pocket and gave her everything he had left. The next day, after balancing their checkbook and looking at the bills, Di realized they had to sell something or else default on their mortgage. So she decided to pawn her grandmother's 25th anniversary ring. But it was gone. She bit her tongue. The next day, Sid went to the diner downtown where he ate every day and offered to be a short order cook for $2.50 an hour. Di asked her mother to watch Abby and got a part-time job at the hardware store. She accepted they were in it for the long haul. Sid figured it would be a few weeks at most. But the price of oil held firm, and his whistling was occasionally interspersed with sighs and gasps of disbelief and dismay. Finally, on January 16, 1979, the Shah got the hell out of Iran and the price started moving and kept moving up. Saudi Arabia cut production, OPEC increased the price, and finally, in March, Sid got the hell out. He had cleared just over $30,000. Remarkably, instead of doubling or tripling down and blowing the whole thing, like most red-blooded American boys and girls have done ever since Jay Gould started investing in railroads, he never bought futures again. Instead, he paid his partners back with interest, redeemed the ring and pocket watch, and used his profits to buy the first of a series of rental properties he'd owned over the years. He did continue to go cook at the diner when they were short-handed. When he came back from the pawn shop and handed Di the ring, she finally stopped biting her tongue and understood both why she'd married him and why it was the craziest thing she'd ever done. When Sid and the Buddha were finished watching the credits roll on his financial documentary, Sid opened his eyes, propped himself up, and saw Willie looking at him from the foot of the bed. "Hey, Willie, I thought your mom was taking you home to wash your mouth out with soap." "She and Grandma got talking, you know how it is." Sid nodded. "Why are you looking at me like that, Willie?" "Well, I came out because I heard you shouting and figured you wanted something. But by the time I got here, you were whistling." "I didn't know people could whistle while they slept." Thanks for listening to The Man Who Woke Up the Buddha. Remember, paid subscribers get free paperback copies of Seasons 1, 2, and, very soon, 3.